So recently there's been an uptick, an explosion, you can say, conversation, and especially use of what is being categorized as psychedelics. Some called plant medicines. Some of it is plant-based, some of it is synthetic. I can't tell you how many people have been approaching me about the ceremonies and experience or journeys that they've had. Many talking very positively at the change that they've experienced, helping them. Some have also spoken negatively and criticized it. So I want to begin with a disclaimer that I'm no expert on this topic. As a matter of fact, I think being an expert is exactly the opposite and defeats the purpose. As they say about the Kabbalah, those that know don't say, and those that say don't know. Being an expert means I'm an expert. I've mastered it. The truth is, a higher reality experience, a higher consciousness experience should be the exact opposite. Not you've mastered it, it has mastered you. It submerges you into a higher reality and you dissolve in it. You get absorbed in it. You're lifted to another place. If it's another mastery, most would have PhDs in it and degrees. It's the exact opposite of what a true spiritual experience is. A true divine experience. So I'm proud to say I'm not a master and not an expert. But yet, we need to speak about it, and it's important to speak about it in the best way we can. And what better place to begin is at the beginning of it all. This is not a new phenomenon. It may be now a headline. A lot of people know about it, a lot of people experiencing it. But firstly, even on the level of the actual substances, there are tribes, there are cultures that have been using it for years, for centuries. But above all, the human condition, the human being, has always been seeking and looking to experience deeper states of consciousness, as well as also healing from the pains and traumas of life, and trying all kinds of methods, some healthy, some not healthy, in between, over and under. So the best place to go is all the way in the beginning. The best-selling book of all time, and I'm not saying it because it's the best-selling book, I'm just trying to demonstrate that it's been around, time-tested, is the Bible itself. What does the Bible say? And hence, what does the Bible say about mind-altering substances? But it's really a deeper question. What does it say about the human condition? What is driving us? First of all, to deal with our pain, with our existential loneliness, with our different issues that we've experienced. And I include also the suffering of life, the traumas of life, the blocks, the fears. And also on the other side, what makes us tick? That we're seeking and yearning and longing to experience something beyond the routine, beyond the pedestrian, deeper and higher states of consciousness and awareness. And as such, it's important also to qualify that there are two different aspects that we need to address. When you talk from a medical point of view, meaning a person is dealing with real issues, whether, as I said, fears, traumas, different blockages, trust issues, things that may be deep-rooted, may even be chemical, or they're based on circumstances, abuse, hurt, sexual abuse. So that's one thing. There's another, and just separating, doesn't mean there is an overlap, which is experiencing deeper states of consciousness, higher states of consciousness. I don't know Aldous Huxley's history, but when he began to experiment, and then wrote the book, Doors of Perception, based on William Blake's poem. I don't know if it came from pain or from curiosity. But regardless, these are definitely two avenues. And they should be addressed separately, because when they're talking about dealing with real problems, then we know we try many different things. When you're talking about a spiritual experience, is it legitimate? Is it appropriate to use substances? Or does that defeat the whole purpose? Again, because it should be experienced naturally or internally, I should say. When I say naturally, I mean without any stimulants and without any induced experiences. So we'll talk about all of this in the context, as I said, what does the Bible say? So let's take a journey. The journey is going to be all the way back into the very deepest recesses of our inner consciousness, and I'll call it even super consciousness. Where do we begin? The human being. The best way to understand ourselves, we have to look at our genesis, at our origins. In scientific terminology, the Big Bang. Where did it all begin? Because if we want to understand ourselves and understand our longings and understand our needs, we need to know, who are we? Now, before you suggest any interventions, you first need a diagnosis. So here's the diagnosis of the human condition. What defines the human being? And where am I getting my information from? Straight from the Bible. And its interpretation based on the mystical interpretations of the Kabbalah, which is all part of the Bible. It's all within those texts. But if you read the verses themselves, you can see it pretty clearly. So it's really about understanding how did we become who we are today. So here I am, here you are, hopefully a healthy human being from head to toe, with arms and legs, with a mind and a heart, with our faculties, the different organs and limbs, and everything that composes a human being. And I go all the way internally, all the way to our cellular structure, our DNA, our genetics, the very building blocks of who we are. The same thing with the larger universe, same idea. As a matter of fact, there's a statement that the human being is a universe, a microcosm, and the universe is like a human being, like an organism, a large one. And physics states that. Today it's all like a hologram. The smallest atom is like a microcosm of everything. So taking the human being, and that's probably easier to speak about, we all know we didn't begin being a 5 or 6 foot individual. I'm just using that, weighing 100 pounds, 150 pounds. I'm not going to go higher than that. But we were born a newborn. But an infant is also not the beginning. Let's go back to our conception. 9 months before our birth, we were conceived. You and I were conceived. Mother and father were intimate. The seed of the father fertilized the egg of your mother. And with the divine blessing, a child was conceived. A fetus. One cell. That one cell in time splits, and then splits again, and splits again, and splits again. And we can actually document, and today we even have imagery, documenting the development of the fetus in the mother's womb. So from one cell, we'll develop into 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, until we have some estimate between 35 and 75 trillion cells. Trillion cells. All began with one cell. Think of it as one seed. And everything is encompassed in that seed in a concentrated form. In truth, science today believes the same was with the creation of the universe. It began a Big Bang, everything concentrated and then exploded. But let's go back to the development of the child. So who you are today all began there. So if we were able to go back in time, and not just in time, conceptually to that point, we would get a picture of ourselves in our purest form. Now, obviously, you can't say it's a living, viable, full entity with a mind and a heart. You know, a one-celled, conceived new fetus doesn't need therapy and doesn't need mind-altering substances and doesn't need anything for that matter. It's not yet in a place that's experiencing anything. At least not in the way we understand it. But it's still who we are. It's the core of who we are. So if we really want to understand ourselves, we need to know what that was like. And then we start understanding how it breaks down into 2 cells, 4 cells, into the multitude of the complex human being. Now, given at birth, and we come into a home, even if it's a healthy, nurturing home, the child is now going to be exposed to toxins, both physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, especially if it's not a healthy home, a dysfunctional or abusive home. So all that purity that began with that one cell is going to be affected by our environment, by people, namely our parents and family, then by others, friends, society, education, schooling, for good and for bad. So as we are now adults, we have to contend with all of that. We can't just say, oh, I'd love to go back to that pure moment. Even though, as we shall discuss, that's exactly what we seek out to do. To reconnect to that deepest point where we began, but we have now many challenges. It's not that easy just to retrace our steps, especially if the paths have been twisted and distorted and clouded and polluted by human experiences. And we know from one extreme to the next, all of us have been affected by life. All of us have been jaded to some extent. Question is, to what extent? So of course, if you talk about the most extreme, people suffering tremendous trauma, tremendous fear, inability to really function properly, so that's of course one extreme. Some of us have milder forms of that. And there's milder and many variations in between. But let's put things into context. Who you are today is not who you were then. That we can all agree. Even who you were as a newborn child, let alone who you were, that one cell that would ultimately shape you and become who you are today. But it would be interesting to say, more than interesting, you could actually make the strongest argument that ultimately the goal to achieve all our aspirations, to be the healthiest you can be, to actualize all your potential, is can you connect back from where you are today, no matter how far you've wandered, back to that original point. If you can do that, whatever method, and we'll talk about methods soon, that's the ultimate goal. And indeed, we will now describe what that looks like. And again, where am I taking the description? Straight from the Bible, from texts. And I will also be quoting some of the Kabbalistic sources in the Zohar, the Arizal, Isaac Luria, in his classic Eitz Chaim, book of the Tree of Life, to explain these verses, how they really describe who we are at our core and essence. So the way the Bible puts it is this. After creating existence, it says the first creation was light. Everything was light. Light consumed everything. On day 2 was the creation of diversity. It says God separated between the higher and the lower. So diversity, essentially the splitting of a cell. The same idea, conceptually. In other words, everything begins from a singularity, and from the singularity, then you have a breakdown into details. And the human being, as a microcosm, is the same idea. The one cell that breaks into many cells, that splits and so on. And we see this consistently. Then let's move to day 6. The creation of the human being. Created in the divine image. So the human being is defined in the Bible as being created in the divine image. Who we are at our core is divine breath. It says God took a clump of earth from the ground and breathed into it. Vayipach, he breathed into it a soul of life, divine breath. So essentially we are divine breath, and indeed in Hebrew, neshama, soul, pronounced differently, is neshima, is breath. Breath and soul. And indeed our breathing, exhale, inhale, is the oxygen that gives us life, but it's the divine breath. Other places it says that we're like compared to the divine flame. Divine breath, divine flame. The soul of a human being is the flame of the divine flame. But let's stick to the divine breath. This human being created male and female, an androgynous creature. And again a split takes place, another split. The split between male and female. And then they are drawn to each other to reconnect to their essential unity and back with the divine image in which they were created. And that is the core source and root of love. What is love? Why do we love? Why do we need love? Why do we want to give love? Love is the quintessential experience of total attachment and union. So as much as the world has become fragmented, as much as the cells separate, they are longing, they're desperate to reconnect, because that's where their essential and healthy origin begins. And that's what love is. In Hebrew, ahava, love, is the same gematria, the same numerical as echad, as unity. So essentially, life is the story of a singularity, of one seamless entity, splitting into parts, and those parts seeking to reconnect and to bring that harmony into the fragmentation, the harmony within the diversity. And that's what a healthy human being is. So everything we long for is something where we all began from. Total unity, one cell, one singularity. It was all light. And then there was a separation between light and dark, between the higher and the lower. In the words of the Arizal, I mentioned Isaac Luria, the Lurianic concept of the secret of the Tzimtzum. What is Tzimtzum? Tzimtzum is utter concealment, like a black hole. Because that divine unity was so seamless and so overwhelming, there's no room for anything else. So to have existence as we know it, we need to have independent consciousness. A divine consciousness is all-consuming, no room for anything else. It's exact words that the Ari uses. So the Tzimtzum is a concealment of that singularity, of that singular consciousness, to allow space. Think of a teacher who's brilliant, and that brilliance is shining forth, there'll be no room, will overwhelm anything around. Or think of water, the entire universe. I should mention another example, was all covered in water at the beginning. Again, a singularity. And then was the division between water and land, another split. So the Tzimtzum essentially causes that consciousness to recede, not physically, conceptually, to allow space for another consciousness. Think going back to the child and its parents and its mother. A mother leaves room within herself for the development of this embryo, of the fetus. That will become ultimately, once the umbilical cord is cut, a separate entity. So for existence to be, we need to have this separation. But the separation, when it's misunderstood, or it's taken too far, can create the separation anxiety, the detachment. That is the antithesis of love and of attachment. And that's indeed what happens. When the umbilical cord is cut, something beautiful happens. A new independent child is born. But if it's cut too much, what I mean by that is not physically. If a mother disappears, if the child is taken from the mother, or there are other experiences of dissonance and disassociation and disconnect, it will affect, because we need that love, we need the nurturing. Think of a newborn child that's not being protected. I don't just mean physically, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, nurtured, embraced. So for 9 months we're embraced within the womb, but the embrace has to continue. And as we grow into adults, if you've had the proper nurturing, which means a separate entity experiencing that singularity, in other words, the balance between individuality and oneness, then we grow into healthy adults that are secure, that are trusting and trustworthy, have a healthy sense of self-esteem and self-confidence, and can then build a relationship with others, to build a relationship to love another in a healthy way. If we that balance is not there, either because we've never become independent, we've been completely suffocated by someone else, or the opposite, we become so separate that we don't experience love, we'll have difficulty in finding healthy relationships. But that is what we long for. Every aspiration of the human being is the aspiration for that pure innocence, that seamlessness of our childhood, and I'd go further all the way to that one cell, all the way back to the divine source, from where the original male and female originated, the divine image in which we were created. So let's continue the story in the Bible. What happens next? we have now the story. I told the story about the unity becoming the cell splitting, the unity now becoming diverse. What happens next? So here it can go two directions, the narrative can go. Either that diversity, though male and female are separate, though land and water are separate, the upper and the lower are separate, the Tzimtzum has created independent consciousness. So the good narrative would be, now those pieces all come together and reconnect with their source. Harmony within the diversity. Or it can go the other direction. And that's what happens. Adam and Eve are placed in the Garden of Eden, and told, serve and protect. Take this world that I've given you and bring it all together. Unite all the pieces, all the cells. Let them communicate with each other in a healthy way and connect them back to their source. Discover that singularity, that love in this detached world, in this fragmented world. But they were tempted, because part of being independent means you will have free will, you have the ability to wander away from your purpose, to betray yourself and betray your very destiny. And that's what happened. They ate from the tree of knowledge. And as they ate from the tree of knowledge, they experienced the first time dissonance. Now, what kind of tree was this tree of knowledge? They ate from it, a substance. So there are actually four opinions, the tree of knowledge. It's not an apple, mind you. There's an esrog, the citron. Second opinion, a fig tree. The third opinion, grain. And the fourth opinion, which we're going to discuss, a vine. Wine. Grapes and the wine of this vine. Now, it deserves its own discussion. What does each of the opinions signify psychologically and emotionally? But let's talk about wine, because wine is a mind-altering substance. Not quite with the power of the psychedelics we mentioned, but it's a mind-altering substance. And it could be used for good, it could be used not for good. In this case, we're told that had they waited till Friday night, they would have made Kiddush and sanctified that wine. But they didn't wait. They were impatient. And the serpent, which is essentially that voice within us, that mischievous voice that can take us in the wrong direction, told them, your independence, God doesn't want you to be like God. He doesn't want you to know good and evil. He doesn't want you to have that experience. Eat from the tree and you'll be like God. And that was the first mistake. They did. They ate from it. And they experienced dissonance. What happens next? They suddenly experience their sexuality. They feel their sexuality. Until then, like a newborn child, they were not self-conscious. They were human beings aligned with their creation and their purpose. Why should they be self-conscious about their sexuality? Suddenly they realized, I'm apart from something else. The man is apart from the woman is apart from the man. We're both apart from our divine image in which we were created. So they felt shame and they covered themselves. Then it says, God comes to the garden and Adam hides. He's hiding from God. And God says, Ayeko, where are you? What does that mean? God doesn't know where he is. Can you hide from God? God was saying the ultimate statement. Think about it. Where have you gone? I don't recognize you. You've wandered away from your purpose. The dissonance you've created. It's like you're sitting with someone and they're right near you, but they're wandering off. Their mind is elsewhere. You say to them, where are you? Are you with me? Are you present? The love, the unity that we once had. I don't feel that the person who loves me is with me. You're not present. Because now there's another agenda. Now that could have been corrected, but it wasn't. Generation after generation, the dissonance only grew. So instead of this independence created by the cell breakdown of the cells, all joining together, it went the other direction. More fragmentation, more separation, more discord, more disunity, to the point of hostilities, injustices, and war itself. Look what human beings have done to each other. Have we perpetrated the greatest crimes against each other? Whether it's killing or murder or rape or whatever it is. How is that possible? We're all part of one large organism. We're all part of one higher unity. But that's what happens when the concealment, the tzimtzum, the separation is misunderstood and misdirected. It can go in the wrong direction. But still there's something within each of us, beating in our hearts, beating in our very DNA, beating in our superconscious, that reminds us, and we're seeking love. We want to connect back to that source. That's the driving force, my friends, for all our needs. The need to reconnect, to attach in the purest possible way. But now, once we've wandered, you don't just end up lost in the forest overnight. It takes time, step by step, and finally you're there. Once you're there, it's like, how do you go back? As I mentioned before, once life is taken over and this, what we called separation, has turned into actual hostility, where a parent can hurt a child, abuse, all forms of dysfunctional behavior, traumas, pain, it's not that simple. You can't just say, okay, let's turn the clock back. But never give up, because the past has not been lost. You're still that one cell you began has not disappeared, it's just gone undercover and has been hijacked. Our consciousness is now controlled by the fragmented consciousness. We'll call it the dissonance consciousness rather than the unified consciousness. And that is indeed the entire story of the Bible. How do you get back? How do you get back to the garden? How do we reclaim paradise? How do we regain our rosebud, our initial innocence, our initial unity, while also being who you are? We're not looking to annihilate. So on a healthy level, the cells within us communicate with each other. And there's a healthy structure. Because remember, we need the structure, but we need the structure to recognize the unifying element. Think of a conductor of a symphony. So the symphony has many musicians and many different parts, but you need that unifying element, that unifying principle. So it's the harmony within diversity. So how do you create that balance? And that's what the entire story of the Bible is about. And I would say the entire story of human history. It's all about how to reconnect. So the Bible gives us ways to do so. And you'll find the story continues. What happens after the flood, which was again an expression of ultimate destruction? The human being became so criminal. The world was filled with crime, with injustice, till they self-destructed. After the flood, Noah comes out of the ark, and what happens? He gets drunk. Either to numb himself, or due to the shock or the trauma that he experienced. And worse terrible things happen. One of his children abuses him. Yet another story of how a substance is abused. A little later, you find the story of the destruction of Sodom, the wicked city of Sodom, and Lot gets drunk. And he too is abused. And then we'll find later another story, maybe the first story that documents the use of a substance. When Nadav and Avihu, the two children of Aaron, biblical story in the book of Leviticus, and they go into the Holy of Holies, the first time they want to experience the highest states of higher spiritual consciousness, it says they went in drunk. Because wine helped them get into that state, but they weren't ready. And what were they consumed by? A strange, alien, foreign fire. That's the expression used. A fire consumed them, and they did not survive. And later we'll find, not in the Bible, but in the Talmud, a story of 4 great sages who wanted to have a spiritual experience and reconnect to that unity as well. But remember, this has to be done with great care, because you're dealing with a tension between a deeper unity and a fragmented universe. So 3 of them get injured. One dies, one goes mad, and one becomes an apostate. Because indeed, when he goes up there, he sees this conflict. It actually says he sees the conflict between the diversity, the duality of the higher water and the lower waters. Rabbi Akiva, interesting, didn't just come out intact. He says he entered intact. He entered B'Shalom in peace. He came out in peace. He had the right set and setting, the right environment, the right experience, because he went with bittul. He went with total humility, not trying to master not trying to be an expert, not trying to be too spiritual, but rather the humility, letting go, surrendering, and allowing the higher experience to envelop him, to engulf him, to absorb him. And he came out intact. And indeed, after the two sons of Aaron died, that strange fire, God tells Moses to tell Aaron, you want to know how to go in the Holy of Holies? Here's how you go. And all the laws of Yom Kippur, the laws of abstinence, of humility, of discipline, of restraint. If you want it too much, it may not be a good sign. You need to allow yourself to grow into it. Which brings us back now to altered states of consciousness. How do you go there? So from the biblical approach and the mystical approach, you have to earn your way. You can't force your way in. You just can't force your way in. It's a step-by-step, a full life, pay the dues, humble, discipline, restraint, controlling your urges and desires. There's no magic trick. There's no magic pill. That's the only way, because then you earn it, and more importantly, you can assimilate it. You can't just force your way back to that utter unity, especially once the cells have not communicated well with each other. Once that diversity, once that fragmentation has turned even hostile, especially when there's traumas and other things. You can't just force your way back in. That's why, from a biblical point of view, that's not the approach how to experience higher states of consciousness. There are ways. The day-to-day disciplines of life, of kindness and generosity. Imagine someone, an arrogant person, behaving obnoxiously and says, you know what, I'm going to take a pill, a mushroom, a chemical, a tea, and I'm going to experience the divine unity. Maybe first get less obnoxious. Maybe first refine yourself a bit. Try to be a mensch. And people say, once I can't, I've been traumatized. No, traumatized is a reason for dealing with your trauma, but it's not a reason for mistreating other people. You have the ability to do so. And if not, you lock yourself up. So first thing is you need to be a person who's a responsible human being in your life. I mean, I'll give just an example. Imagine a child experiences a sexual pleasure, intimacy. They're not ready for it. They may enjoy it, but they just don't have the containers. They have not earned it. The question is whether adults have. But at least an adult has a certain maturity, a potential maturity. It reminds me, a lot of people who describe to me their spiritual experiences through substances, I don't want to dismiss it. But I say to myself, maybe it's like a person the first time they've had sex. So of course they're excited. And tell them, listen, this has been going on for thousands of years. There are people who are very well versed in the spiritual experience. Not to dismiss, welcome to the club. But no, now experience humility and realize it's a journey. And it's a journey that you can't induce. Will I say that people are not having an experience? The truth is that one cell, that singularity is a reality. So of course there are ways you can get there that are simulated, or there are ways that are induced, and I'm not going to dismiss that. As a matter of fact, I remember once giving a class. At the end of the class, somebody came into my class, and clearly he was high on something. And then he told us he was on an acid trip, and he was still in it. He says, I love you, Rabbi Jacobson, I love you. What you say resonates, but I appreciate you because I've experienced LSD. He says, let me tell you something. I grew up in a Jewish religious home. I put on tefillin, I kept Shabbos, ate kosher. But then I dropped it all. It was all meaningless as a young teenager. And I found my truth through Zen Buddhism, through LSD. It came from the 60s, that generation. I was once on a plane, and I remember I dropped acid before I got on the plane. I love doing that, looking out at the clouds, the skies, the heavens, all comes alive. Basically taking 2 trips at once, on a plane and also his acid trip. And suddenly in the back of this airplane, I hear Hebrew. A group of minyan of Jews, a quorum of Jews praying. And they say, Kodesh, 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 which is the three words, holy, 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 from the prayers. And I suddenly saw the celestial angels. And I experienced the pulsating movements of divine energy all around me. I jumped up, I went back to the back of the plane. I can't even necessarily exactly mimic his passion as he was saying it, but I'm telling the story as I recall it. I went back to the back of the plane, I put on tefillin, and I prayed with them, and from then on I started putting on tefillin every day. I started keeping Shabbos and eating kosher. All due to my acid trip. What do you say to that, Rabbi Jacobson? What do you say to your class about this? There were over 100 people there. Everybody's looking at me. What am I going to say? So after the prerequisite joke, I said, maybe you should go to one of these kosher certification organizations and get an OU or an OK on your on acid. Okay, that was just a joke. I said, look, what do you say to this? A person is in a deep coma, and nothing that the doctors are doing can get him out of the comatose state. They try this, they try that, nothing. And it's getting dangerous. It's life-threatening. And then someone says, I think with a very heavy dose of drugs, certain drugs, we can get him out of it. You would never give those drugs to any healthy person. But in this circumstance, you do anything, like shock treatment. And they give it to him, and he's revived. What do I say? I say, thank God that God planted a power in these drugs to save a person's life. But I would not go ahead and say everybody should be taking this. It can be dangerous, and there's no need for it. So I say to you, yes, I understand you were in a spiritual comatose state, and it was the LSD or whatever it was that helped you wake up. Now that you're putting on tefillin, now that you've found the biblical way of experiencing the divine, that's what you should embrace. And teach others what you learned from this. So I'm not going to dismiss and validate your deeper experience, whatever it was that you experienced, but I'll tell you that now go so-called through the direct path. And that's what I want to go back to. So does the Bible condone the use of substances? Absolutely not. Because there's a way to do it, the healthy way to do it. And I'm talking now for having these deeper experiences and reconnecting to that unity. Remember, the cells communicate with each other in a healthy way. Then different traumas and experience the tree of knowledge of our lives, where we lose our innocence, and the cells are not communicating quite that clearly. But there's still that inner place. So there are ways, there are methods. I talk about a spiritual spa. There are cognitive methods, emotional methods, behavioral methods, spa, study, prayer, action. Torah, Avodah, Gemilas Chasam, the three pillars that a world stands on, that you can cognitively and emotionally and behaviorally condition yourself to reach states like that and grow step by step by step. Should there be a situation where a person's in a spiritual coma, so it doesn't surprise me at all that there are methods. Some people went to the east, to journey to the east. Some people used substances that woke something up in them. But I would never recommend it initially. Now that's regarding the spiritual experience. Regarding the medicinal one, where people are dealing with trauma, anxiety, depression, and stuff like that, so that we're talking now another domain where the Bible itself says, V'rapi yarapele, the healer shall heal you. That the Torah, the Bible is giving permission for a healer. God says, even though I am the healer, and all healing comes from me because I am that one source, that original place where all the diversities began. Every form of illness and disease is a form of fragmentation and disconnect. And I'm the healer that's giving you the power of love, of how to bring love back into your life in unity. But I'm also giving human beings the power to heal. I'm imparting to them some of my power. Obviously, they have to do it with humility and know that they're agents, divine agents. They're not gods themselves. And I've also given them the power to find medicines or develop medicines that can help. So from that point of view, of course it makes sense. The Bible itself sanctions and says there are healers and there are healing agents, and they need to be used. with discretion, obviously, professionally, humbly, and make sure it's productive, because it could also be destructive. We all know strong medications of any sort, just because they can heal so powerfully, they can also be very destructive if they're not used properly, or they're abused or misused or overused. So all this is talked about, goes back thousands of years. And that is some of the biblical perspective about mind-altering substances, mind-altering drugs, all forms of substances. And it's not just substances. It's anything that brings you to that higher state. So what we need to develop, and this deserves its own workshop, its own discussion, or discussions, is what is that biblical approach? Tell me how to do it. These ceremonies and journeys are using methods, some time-tested methods, some experimental methods. I can't vouch for these methods. I don't know them all. I don't know what they're based on. But there are biblical methods that don't require any substances. The Zoysi of Aaron. Here's how Aaron, here you want to enter the Holy of Holies, I'll show you how to enter. And it begins, I will say, with the humility, with recognizing that this is a humble journey. It's not about me and you wanting it. It's about experiencing truth because it's true. Not because I'll feel good because I experience truth. There's nothing wrong with feeling good, but it's not driven by that. So this is somewhat a take on this subject. Much more to say on the topic. So no, by no means is this exhaustive, and I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your feedback, your thoughts, your comments, your suggestions, your critique. And above all, please share. Please share this. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Go to meaningfullife.com where you can find more on this topic. I spoke about it as well on Sunday, on our Sunday program called Ayahuasca, Is It a Spiritual Experience? And I intend to speak more about this because it's an important topic. And above all, for me, it's not about the substances. It's not about the psychedelics. It's not about the plant medicines. It's about us. Who are you as a human being? You deserve love. You deserve to connect all the disjointed parts of your life, and even the painful parts. You deserve to reconnect to that source. And sometimes pain and trauma actually can be a catalyst, can be a springboard, because it motivates us. It gets us out of our comfort zone. So use it as such, and maybe actually reach places where we can connect to that one cell that you were once, but now, not as a one cell that permeates, that saturates, that infuses all the details of our lives. The bridge between the fusion and bridge between the superconscious and the conscious, between land and water, between the higher and the lower, between the pre-symptom consciousness and the post-symptom reality, between that newborn, that one cell, and the 75 trillion cells. That's the ultimate goal. And to do so by returning to paradise, to the garden, and this time not be at loss when you're asked the question, where are you? I know exactly where I am. I am a human being on this earth, with my feet firmly planted on the ground, but my head in the heavens, in the clouds. Who am I? I'm a human being that is a vehicle for the ultimate spiritual and divine within me. I'm the infinite packaged in the finite. I am the unity expressed in all the glorious multitudes of diversity. Everyone be well, and please go to meaningfullife.com. This has been Simon Jacobson. Thank you so much.
This program is brought to you by the Meaningful Life Center. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at meaningfullife.com/donate.